Robert Scheer, he's a longtime LA Times columnist. He's the editor-in-chief of Truthdig, and he's got a new book out. It's called The Great American Stickup: How Reagan Republicans and Clinton Democrats Enriched Wall Street While Mugging Main Street. Robert, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hi.
Hey.
You again.
Yes, it is. This time in a different format. We talked to Robert on MSNBC a little while ago. That's why we say that. Now, I want to start off with I think what is one of the most interesting parts of the book, which is you call people like Robert Rubin, Lawrence Summers, and Henry Paulson. First two worked for Clinton. One of them works for Obama. And of course, Henry Paulson worked for Bush. You call them supervillains. That's strong language. Do you really think they're villains in the sense that they knew what they were doing and they did it anyway?
You know, I'm not their shrink or anything. I mean, I just know that there were people in real time, like Brooksley Born, who was sort of the heroine of my book and really of that piece of history, who was appointed by Clinton to be head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. She was the first woman editor of the Stanford Law Review. She worked for one of the most prestigious Washington law firms, and she represented banks and big companies. And she knew a great deal more than Rubin, Greenspan, and Summers combined about these things. And I know that she sounded the alarm over a dozen times in congressional testimony. And what they did is, instead of listening to this woman, they tried to shut her up, forced her basically out of the administration. She wasn't renewed. And they passed a really onerous piece of legislation, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which prevented not only her agency from regulating derivatives, but it said in Titles 3 and 4, any agency and any existing law. It exempted these derivatives to give them what Summers called legal certainty and against any regulation or any regulatory body. Now, either you were willfully stupid about these things, or you were drinking the Kool-Aid being doled out by the Wall Street lobbyists. Again, a psychiatrist would have to figure that one out. But the fact is, these guys came to be rewarded for hurting the interests of the economy in a very profound way. You would not have had the meltdown if not for that legislation.
But, Robert, here's the thing, right? It's like today...
But do you understand, by the way, what I was just to say, you have to understand that because of not only that and the reversal of Glass-Steagall allowing the merger of these too big-to-fail banks, Robert Rubin then went. He had come from Goldman Sachs, and then he went to work for Citigroup and got $15 million a year and was there through the whole subprime all-day nightmare. He was there when they were a major culprit in this. We had to bail out that bank for $45 billion directly, underwrite another $300 billion in toxic assets. Summers, while he was advising Obama, got $8 million from hedge funds and from speaking fees, got $135,000 from Goldman Sachs. Do you think that? I mean, to me, it smells like bribery. And who gets $135,000 for a little speech?
My guess, Robert, I know I hear you on all that, right? But that became such a norm that I think that they really believe in their heart of hearts that they didn't do a damn thing wrong. They're like, well, I mean, that's the going market rate for a speech, $135,000. So of course I got that. And I was the Treasury Secretary. Of course, Citibank was going to pay me $15 million a year. Okay,
can I ask you a question then? I mean, then what right do we get to criticize Republicans?
Right.
I mean, come on. Okay.
No,
I mean,
Robert, hold on.
I'll give anybody a buy you want me to give, and I'll stop writing if you want me to that much. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, if the Republicans had pulled this off, we would be screaming to the sky. Okay. And what I say in the book,
Robert. There's a reason why I'm telling you to hold on. You're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I couldn't agree more with you. I think these guys botched it in the worst possible way. I think they're totally guilty. I think what you say about the end of the Clinton administration is 100% true. I say the same, and I catch hell from so-called progressives who are just people who are in love with the Democratic Party. I said, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm actually trying to get into why things aren't getting fixed, right? So...
I'll give you the answer.
So hold on. So today Obama was on CNBC, and one of the Wall Street hedge fund guy who apparently went to school with him got up and said, why do you keep beating up Wall Street like a piñata, right? And then Mike Bloomberg, who I think is a reasonable mayor in other respects, comes out and says, look, a lot of my friends who are rich here in New York and work on Wall Street, et cetera, they don't mind paying a little higher taxes. They signed up for that when they voted for Obama, but they don't like being vilified. So now I bring you all of that, Robert, because I think nobody got the lesson. Nobody learned a damn thing. Like, they think what they did was perfectly okay, and that we're being unreasonable by saying, hey, you know what, maybe you shouldn't have taken those billions and trillions of our money.
Well, you got a culture that supports their behavior. They, have huge PR machinery. They have the mass media. I mean, I could tell you that, it wasn't Summers and Rubin alone. The New York Times, for example, the center of reasonable discussion in this country, right, had editorials at the time. Glass-Steagall. You don't have a lot of time for me to read from my book, but, I quote the editorial that they had on April 8th, 1998, when Glass-Steagall was reversed. We had a regulatory system that worked for 6 decades. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the great, last great president of any party, implement these things to prevent another depression, separate these investment banks and commercial banks from merging their activities. One's supposed to represent the rich who, know what they're doing. The other are the deposits of ordinary people that are insured. And, that was the merger between Citibank and Travelers that was put together under Clinton, and that's the bank that Rubin went to work for. I mean, an incredible, benefiting from your own legislation. But, the New York Times editorialized in favor of it,
See,
and said in one stroke they have temporarily demolished the increasing unnecessary walls built during the Depression to separate commercial banks from investment banks. And in their news reporting, the same thing, that same day, it said, in a single day with a single bold merger pending legislation in Congress to sweep away Depression-era restrictions on the financial service has been given a sudden and unexpected new chance of passage. And, this kind of language. So, yeah, these guys operate in a culture where you give a contribution to the Harlem Dance Group or you say some nice liberal-sounding things, and you're off the hook. But I don't see that's my job. I don't work for them. I did vote for them, by the way, and I did contribute money to Obama. I mean, I gave him $500 about 36 hours before the election because I was afraid he would lose, and I'm still happy he won. I think it's been a good thing for the country to have a non-white male president, and I think the guy, has some good values and has accomplished some good things. I'm not interested in vilifying anybody. I'm trying to speak to some of the pain that's out there, and I don't want to leave it to the Tea Party people to be the only ones that address that. I just saw a statistic that $10 trillion of family worth has been lost, okay? $10 trillion. We have 11 million mortgages underwater. We have another 4 million that have already been lost. They've lost the houses. You're talking there about 50 million people have lost their nest egg, have lost their castle. That's not kidding around. You go to Riverside, California, you go to south of Florida, go anywhere. I'm down in town, Los Angeles now. I'll take you on a tour of the neighborhoods, and see the people that lost everything. And then, of course, it even affects everyone because even if you own your house outright, it's worth less than it was, and that was your nest egg. It was the basis of your retirement. So, this is not a made-up problem. And we're not out of the woods because if you can't fix housing, you're not going to get consumption back, and we're not going to make the economy whole. And, so these guys caused an incredible amount of damage, and you say maybe I'm vilifying. I don't think I'm vilifying them.
No, Robert. Once again, you're misunderstanding.
Well, I don't want to misunderstand you.
Okay,
I like your show, and I like you, so I want to get it right.
Right. No, I'm telling you what they're saying.
Yeah,
I don't
know
agree
what
with
they're
them.
saying, but I think they're a bunch
don't agree
of
with them
liars,
at all.
frankly. I think they're covering their tracks, so why should I respect that?
No. So here's where I'm driving with it. And we're talking to Robert Scheer. He's the editor-in-chief of Truthdig, and he just wrote the book, The Great American Stickup. Here's where I'm driving with it, Robert. Look, if the people in power, certainly Republicans are, to the man, every single one of them, wholly owned subsidiary of Wall Street, right? So now, and then you have Democrats like Obama, who hasn't really fixed it. He hires Larry Summers, who is probably, as you point out, one of, if not the most guilty Democrat in the whole country for this financial collapse. You have the media who's going along. You have, to the point where the people in Wall Street don't even understand. They're like, what is the problem? What's the big deal? Why is everybody vilifying, or why are a couple of people vilifying us? If you have such a consensus that nothing wrong really happened, how do we fight against it? How do we overturn it? How do we get people to realize what's really happening?
Excuse me, they know what happened. What they believe is the best defense is a good offense, okay? Come on, let's not fall for this garbage. My book opens, if you have a copy, on page 1, George Bush is in the White House. He turns to Henry Paulson, who was, after all, had come over from Goldman Sachs, right? And George Bush plaintively asks him, quote, "How did this happen?" Close quote, okay? This is all in Paulson's book. Paulson writes, "It was a humbling question for someone from the financial sector to be asked. After all, we were the ones responsible." So you just tell that to these guys on Wall Street. Don't hear this guy made you whole, Obama. He followed exactly what George W. Bush, they bailed you out. The Fed has $2 trillion of your toxic assets, which we taxpayers have taken off your books. You're still holding a whole bunch of this junk, so every time housing looks like it might make a revival, you dump it back on the market and you depress the prices. And as Henry Paulson wrote, after all, we were the ones responsible. Okay? So this is what is this vilification? They got everything they wanted from the so-called new regulations. The only thing that might have a little bite is the consumer agency, and we can't even get Elizabeth Warren to be the chair of it. She's going to be some kind of advisor, window dressing. So
how do you deal with it, Robert? How do we fix it?
Well, first of all,
it looks like we have overwhelming odds. It looks like they own everything.
Look, I would love to be able, from time to time, to come on your show and comment, because I think you guys represent an alternative to the Tea Party, okay? But Obama doesn't present an alternative, and that's why the Democrats are in trouble right now, Occasionally he says, look, first of all, in my book, I quote the speech that Obama gave in April. Talk about vilification. The speech he gave in April of '08 at Cooper Union. It's in my book. I think I got the whole speech in there, where he lays it out just the way I did on this show already, okay? He pointed to that, we're not having an intellectual disagreement with Obama. He understood that. Now, whether Stiglitz helped him write that speech or Volcker or where he got it from, but he understood it. He laid it out, Then something happened. How in the world a man who gave that speech then turned to Summers, who was the guy he was targeting, really, and the other disciples of Rubin. Remember, Timothy Geithner was the head of the New York Fed at that time. He was the one that presided over the George W. Bush handouts, and he's now our Treasury Secretary. There's really questions. It's about the money, the role of money, the power of Wall Street. Wall Street.
You got to give me an answer. You got to give me an answer, because Robert, look, here's the thing.
The answer is we have to be
overwhelming change.
Yeah.
And the guy we put in charge to do that change got sucked into the establishment instantly.
Right.
So what went wrong? I mean, because if we do that again, if we vote for overwhelming change again, based on experience, that next guy's going to get sucked in and do the same exact damn thing. It leaves us hopeless.
No, it's not hopeless. We have to do what Tom Paine did, After all, we wouldn't have even had a Bill of Rights if there weren't some people who said, no, Mr. Washington and Jefferson, I think we still need to put some specific language in here, We can't just trust the good guys. And some of us have to, in a democratic society, be that voice that can't be stifled, That's, you just got to speak truth to power and not be overwhelmed by it. And the scary thing is, if we lose our voice, we leave it to the Tea Parties to be the only voice of outrage and populism out there. That's what's happening. And these guys are playing a dangerously hypocritical game, the Tea Party people. They're basically letting Wall Street off the hook. They're blaming this whole, bailout of Wall Street on the Democrats, which is wrong. But we're not in touch with the pain out there. That's really the problem. And I don't know what Obama was doing, but from day one, he shouldn't have gotten into every other issue, because he wasn't going to deliver that much on health care anyway. And Afghanistan, of course, is a total disaster.
How did they co-opt him? How did they co-opt him instantly?
Well, it's the meritocracy, I think. It's power, it's money. And we think just because somebody looks like they don't come from the richest, most powerful people, that they're going to be independent, and they're not. And you go, what do we teach? I'm a professor, I teach in college, and but what do we teach? The correct answer, and we don't really have serious class divisions in this country. Well, that's utter nonsense. If you look at what happened from Clinton on, we've had a widening division. We've had, as Arianna Huffington points out in her book, a real erosion of the middle class. We've had an increase in poverty, and now we have more, as higher rate of people in poverty in the working age from 18 to 65 than we did in 64. we've wiped out all of the gains that we had since then, and then so we have to I don't know. It seems to me we have to start to think clearly. We have to be in touch with what's really happening to people, and not surrender it to these phony populists on the right. And I think that's what shows like yours should represent, and also give some space for people like myself who want to express that sense of outrage. Let me tell you, Hillary Clinton once at a White House dinner in front of a whole bunch of people when I was going through the receiving line said I was her favorite columnist in the whole world, okay? Not just the United States, the whole world. Because why? I was defending the Clinton administration when they were being attacked over the Monica Lewinsky and the stain on the ground, blah, 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 So, okay, and the temptation is to say, hey, that's wonderful. Let me write more columns you like. But, when I was writing this book, I had covered these things when I was working for the LA Times. I was covering those hearings. I was appalled by that. I was appalled by the Telecommunications Act, which, really ended sensible regulation of the communications industry. I was appalled by the so-called welfare reform, which ended the federal poverty program. But I basically went along with the lesser evil idea, and I was, very upset about the right-wing attacks on Clinton on the personal basis, blah, blah, blah. So I fell for this. And doing the research for this book, I just really criticized myself. I said, what? My goodness, you just, for whatever I wrote at the time, I wasn't tough enough, and it bothers me. And we should have seen it coming. We should have challenged it when it happened. And there were very few people. Unfortunately, Feingold, Senator Feingold, is one of the few, and he's now in trouble. Ironically, even though he was the one person who really stood against it most forcefully. Drogan from South Dakota, who's dropping out. Ed Markey from Massachusetts was against it. When it was happening, they sounded the alarm, but very few. There were only 8 senators who voted against the reversal of Glass-Steagall.
One of the other problems, and we got to wrap this up because I got somebody else is coming. Ironically, we're going to talk to a Republican Tea Party person in the next segment. But look, my final thought on this is, look, we did a clip of Evan Bayh just a couple of days ago, and he says, well, everybody I talk to thinks that these tax cuts won't hire anybody else if we don't get these tax cuts. Meaning that everybody he talks to makes over $250,000, right? The problem is the people in power, it's D.C. and New York, they live in a bubble. And Robert, they don't see the pain you see. They don't see the pain I see. They just see a whole bunch of rich people with an enormous sense of, entitlement, right? It's so ironic that they criticize entitlement spending because they have this tremendous sense of entitlement. And if you prick that bubble a little bit, they get so upset. They say, why are you vilifying me? Why? Well, why? And unfortunately, the only people that Obama is listening to is those guys. And, you have to do it. We have to do. We have to figure out a way to just pop that bubble. Until we pop that bubble, these guys are going to continue going down the wrong road until we crash. And that last crash looks like a comedy compared to what's coming up next.
You got it.
All right.
Great American Stick-Up. That's what they pulled off, and it was bipartisan.
And that's what the book is about. It's called The Great American Stick-Up. It's by Robert Scheer. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.